Have you ever had a personal relationship with Donald Trump?
What do you mean by personal relationships?
Have you socialized with him?
Yes, sir.
Yes?
Yes, sir.
Have you ever socialized with Donald Trump in the presence of females under the age of 18?
Though I'd like to answer that question, at least today, I'm going to have to assert my 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendment rights, sir.
If you're innocent, why are you taking the 5th Amendment?
We're going to move on to this Epstein case and Donald Trump. The Epstein case is a very important case because this man was a Mossad operative planted there inside of the United States with the knowledge of several people in the establishments inside of the United States. Some people in the intelligence community inside of the United States knew exactly what he was doing, but the people on top of them told them not to reveal all of the information. His death was very shady, was very dodgy. The way his body was taken out, the way he committed suicide, when he was supposedly should have been monitored 24/7 in the secret special cell that he was in, which is like basically a hotel room. Yeah, television and everything, and he was supposed to be monitored 24/7. All of a sudden, man kills himself, and the authorities decide to show his face when they're taking him out. You know, can it be clearer than that? Why are you making an effort to show his face that much? And anyway, when they showed that face, it wasn't really matching to Epstein himself. So there are concerns there and speculations about the authenticity of the death of Epstein himself. Probably changed identity, disappeared somewhere. It was a very powerful, reaching figure. Very shady past also in how he reached to these levels. This man had very big ties with several people. Presidents were there, leaders, businessmen going to this island of his with a cult-like dome over there. Lord knows what he was doing there. But he was clearly raping American girls. That's what he was doing. Literally, he was kidnapping American girls by manipulation, whatever you want to call it, small girls, taking them to this island to provide these services for these people. He's planting cameras everywhere, and I hope you have a blackmailing network. There were suspicions from the beginning that Donald Trump was part of this network. Why? Because, well, firstly, he had relations with Jeffrey Epstein. He was seen with Jeffrey Epstein. He doesn't deny that he had relations with Epstein, and his excuse was, well, everyone knew Jeffrey Epstein in Palm Beach and what have you, and all of that talk. And during the campaign of Donald Trump, people within his campaign were saying that we're going to release the Epstein files. We're going to release the Epstein files. Why on earth is Ghislaine Maxwell in prison? Doesn't she have information? Why isn't that information being made public? Is it because the people who are still serving or still have power are still there? What's happening? Anyway, they were saying, yeah, we will release them, up until we had this facade of like a 1% release of things that are irrelevant. Not the whole Epstein files. We were looking for a list with names of everyone. The people are entitled to know. What do you mean a Mossad agent operating in the United States, getting the world's leaders and wealthiest people on an island and kidnapping American girls and raping them on these islands? What is that? Is that the world's greatest nation on earth? That happens and it goes as if nothing happened? And then they silence them with hush money and send them people who are wearing ties to threaten them in their homes, to threaten the girls, by the way, who were victims. That's those who dared to kind of challenge it. Because, you know, there was a case and you had these Netflix shows and all of that. So the Trump fan base was expecting Mr. America First here to release the information. Only for them to find out that Mr. America First isn't releasing the information. As a matter of fact, he's saying in videos, well, that's not important. Boring stuff. Nothing happened. All sorts. So the people are kind of getting confused. And this is his fan base. That's number one. You're coming, we voted for you, number one, to end the wars and bring peace, only for us to see that you lick the boots of Benjamin Netanyahu and follow his orders. Then you told us you're going to be releasing the files. Why are you not releasing the files? Do you have something to do with it? If you're not worried about it, he would be the first one releasing it. If it was something not to do with him and against some of his, enemies, right, or opponents, he would have loved it. Trump. I get confused between Trump and Netanyahu because they're very similar. But clearly, there's something going on. Anyway, Wall Street Journal published an article. That article said that Donald Trump in 2003 sent a letter to Jeffrey Epstein that included documents. That was among documents included in evidence assembled by the federal criminal investigators as part of their probe with Epstein, by the way. That letter included like these hidden messages and, explicit stuff in a clear indication that the relationship between the two was more than just, I know you from Palm Beach because everyone knows you from Palm Beach. First, who are you even? Man coming out of nowhere, suspicious career, all of a sudden he has the most expensive places in Manhattan and a private island and his own network on the island, by the way, serious stuff. His own network in the island. It's as if, it's a country. And world leaders going and coming back and going and coming back. Wall Street Journal reported this, but the man got really angry. And now he's saying that I'm going to file a lawsuit. Not just any lawsuit, by the way. $10 billion US. Imagine that, $10 billion US. He's suing the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch, owning, of course, Wall Street Journal, for $10 billion US over a Wall Street Journal story on Epstein birthday letter. And let's stop here again for a second. You're the President of the United States. Do you have the time even to start filing these lawsuits and for 10 billion as well? Secondly, if you're that innocent, why don't you release the files then? Then you would give everyone comfort, wouldn't you? And reassurance. And first and foremost, your base, right? American MAGA supporters, make America great again and America first, and all these slogans. They want the Epstein files to be released. As a matter of fact, in your campaigns, Trump, people were chanting Genocide Joe. You had anti-genocide people voting for you because of your promises. They wanted the Epstein list. They wanted you to focus on America first. They didn't want interference with other countries or dragging the United States to other wars, let alone having an attack, doesn't matter how theatrical it is, on behalf of a genocidal entity that has been committing war crimes and genocide for 2 years against the Palestinian people. Why doesn't he release the files? And cuts a long story short. Then, if you release the files, you will have solid evidence. But you see how much of a difficult position he's in now, by the way? And it doesn't really look good on him. Why? Because if you were so certain, and if you're suing this man, release the files then. Release everything. Show that you're not included in anything in these files. Or do these files actually include Donald Trump? And is that letter actually real? Because we can't verify if the letter is real or not. I'm not saying that the file is real. And by the way, I'm not saying that Trump has had dealings, as in was part of the, blackmailing. I'm not saying that, but could he have been that? Could it have been a case of Trump actually being in those files? Was he blackmailed? I mean, that's the only thing that we can ask. Was he blackmailed, and can that explain his situation or actions, or lack thereof? So if you're so innocent, release the files and let the people see them. That way you would close the whole thing and sue Murdoch and everyone else who said for sure that you were part of this blackmailing ring with Jeffrey Epstein, and seal it. But instead, what does he do? Whenever he's asked about this case, he says, oh no, it's boring. Why are you even asking that? Why are you even mentioning the Epstein files? We have more pressing things to talk about. What more pressing things than a man having the most sensitive information about the people running your country? What's more pressing than that? If there's a network, if there's an elite, if there's a secret group of people running things, we deserve to know. But it's very simple. If there is. If there are files, and there are files, and that's why Maxwell is still in prison, by the way, then show the people and prove your innocence. But clearly he's not saying that, and that doesn't look good on him, which again could explain why he's trying to hide the files and not publish these files.
Was Jeffrey Epstein a Mossad asset?
Well, Alex Acosta, the Florida prosecutor, declared him to be, said that he belonged to intelligence. I think he was told to basically retract that comment. A Saudi passport or Saudi ID card was found in Jeffrey Epstein's belongings, among his belongings after he died or supposedly committed suicide. His partner, his wing woman, Ghislaine Maxwell, who was convicted of trafficking minors to him exclusively, not to anyone else, was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, who received practically a state funeral in Israel. Had Mossad chiefs at his funeral, and his last phone call was to Samuel Pisar, who was the father and the stepfather of Tony Blinken, who is his fixer, who is also the head of the French Jewish lobby. Robert Maxwell was definitely a Mossad agent. So there are all these connections to Jeffrey Epstein through the Mossad. But really, ultimately, maybe Jeffrey Epstein's ultimate legacy was helping elect Trump by convincing a bunch of low IQ MAGA dupes that Trump was going to take on the deep state and release all these Epstein files. And at the end of the day, as Trump himself said, Trump didn't want to ruin a bunch of lives by releasing what he considered phony material, which could have come back and harmed him. No one was closer in U.S. politics to Jeffrey Epstein than Donald Trump. Why did anyone think that Donald Trump was going to be the one to expose the Epstein network? Well, they were dupes. They were bamboozled. They were took. They were the butt of a P.T. Barnum joke. And now, I mean, I just look at them and laugh as I see this gigantic online social media meltdown of MAGA.
Here's Trump yesterday at a cabinet meeting, very defensive. Chris has edited this down. Very defensive when this issue was raised. Chris.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time, and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
I mean, I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein.
In February, I did an interview on Fox, and it's been getting a lot of attention because I was asked a question about the client list, and my response was, it's sitting on my desk to be reviewed. Also, to the tens of thousands of video, never going to be released, never going to see the light of day. To him being an agent, I have no knowledge about that. We can get back to you on that. And that's it on Epstein.
Well, she has driven a wedge down the middle of MAGA, because you're right. Many people believed Trump ordered it released. A federal judge ordered it released. She herself ordered it released. Now they're saying the list doesn't exist. I don't think people that are involved in this issue believe that, but I'm just fascinated with Epstein's international connections, and you just outlined them. I forgot about Robert Maxwell.
Well, hey, maybe there's nothing there. Maybe they couldn't find anything. That's a possibility. But Pam Bondi said that there was this black book showing that hundreds of people had been involved in raping minors. She said this on camera.
Yes.
So did Dan Bongino. He said it's going to take down the Democrats, the Clinton network. He said this again and again when he was, on his Rumble show, and now he's deputy director of the FBI. So it looks like obviously a gigantic bait and switch to dupe Trump supporters, and then Donald Trump has to shut the whole thing down because Donald Trump allowed NBC to come into a party and film him partying with Jeffrey Epstein and Buffalo Bills cheerleaders while Trump commented, whispering in Jeffrey Epstein's ear that, certain cheerleaders were hot. The cheerleaders were like grinding on Donald Trump and he was dancing with them and showcasing himself as this great Lothario. And Jeffrey Epstein was right there by his side. There's photos of Bill Clinton with Jeffrey Epstein. There's, Clinton's on the logs on the Lolita Express, but there's nothing as vivid as the footage of Trump with Epstein. Epstein also talked about his friendship with Trump to the reporter Michael Wolff. There are damning audio recordings. And the Democrats never did anything with this. I said on Twitter yesterday, or X, before Grok had a complete Hitlerian meltdown, I said that this should have been the focus of the Democrats' attacks. Kamala should have brought it up in every debate. Trump Epstein was real, but instead they focus on Trump Russia, which was a gigantic hoax, and it had no currency among voters. Trump Epstein would have hurt Trump among young males, among women, among all these groups he won among the Democrats, but the Democrats wouldn't touch it for some reason, and the reason is because the Democrats were also on Epstein's books. So this is a scandal that I think helps discredit the two-party system, and we will see Trump, as he exonerates Epstein and all of the people supposedly in Epstein's black book, continue to focus on arresting the poor in Home Depot parking lots and throwing them in private prisons run by Geo Group, the top private prison contractor in the country whose former top lobbyist was seated right next to Donald Trump in that briefing, Pam Bondi. And border czar Tom Homan was a highly paid consultant to Geo Group. So what I'm saying is the Trump administration has nothing to gain financially out of releasing the Epstein files, and that's all they seem to really care about. And so they're going to focus on their bottom line.
This is the story that refuses to die. A scandal so tangled, so rich in ambiguity and power, it's been called the mother of all conspiracy theories. It's a story of secret deals, shadowy intelligence ties, including alleged links to Israel's Mossad, and at the center, Jeffrey Epstein, a man with no degree, no known business empire, but an empire of connections. A man who managed to go from high school teacher to billionaire confidant of presidents and royals. In this investigation, we'll dive into Epstein's carefully curated world, his ties to Israeli-linked mega donors, his access to elites in Washington and Tel Aviv, and Donald Trump, who knew him, befriended him, and now avoids his name completely. But the question is no longer, what did Jeffrey Epstein do? It's who let him do it, and why. Before the scandals and before the island, there was something more baffling. How did a man with no credentials, no pedigree, and no legitimate fortune end up in the same room as presidents and prime ministers? Well, let's start here. Bear Stearns, one of Wall Street's most cutthroat firms in the 1970s. That's where Epstein began, without a college degree. Not exactly the usual resume for high finance, but Epstein had charm and ambition. His ascent was rapid and strangely unstoppable, all until he was fired. Officially for something as simple as falsifying expenses. A career-ending mistake for most, but not for Epstein. Instead of vanishing, he resurfaced. This time in the murky world of 1980s arms dealing, the kind of industry that lives in classified memos and secret ledgers. Now, we don't know exactly what he did, but insiders say he made connections there, and powerful ones. This was when Epstein started collecting names, not just acquaintances, but people he could charm, control, and even compromise. Then came along Steve Hoffenberg. In the early 90s, Epstein joined Hoffenberg in what would become one of the largest Ponzi schemes in American history. Hundreds of millions stolen. Hoffenberg was eventually sent to prison. And Epstein, he walked away untouched. Not even charged. Why? Well, that's the first major mystery, but it wouldn't be the last. Years later, Epstein embedded himself with Leslie Wexner, founder of the Wexner Foundation, a program that trains Israeli public officials and security operatives, many of whom go on to serve in high-level positions, including Mossad. Wexner built a retail empire, Victoria's Secret, Bath & Body Works, Abercrombie & Fitch, and at one point, he was one of the most powerful figures in American retail. Jeffrey would come to later abuse this relationship, acting as a Victoria's Secret talent scout, luring young women with fake modeling auditions, only to try and assault them behind closed doors. But more to the point, Wexner didn't just hire Epstein, he gave him power of attorney, access to his entire financial empire. Epstein ran his finances, lived in his Manhattan mansion. Some even allege Epstein used sexual leverage to gain that trust. Though unproven, Wexner later admitted he felt used. From here, Epstein's wealth exploded. Private jets, a mansion in Manhattan, a 100-acre island in the Caribbean, another in the Virgin Islands, multiple homes in Florida and Paris, and still only one confirmed client, Leslie Wexner. So, where did the rest of the money come from? That brings us to the Mega Group, a little-known collection of ultra-wealthy, pro-Israel philanthropists. Leslie Wexner was a founding member. This group didn't just donate to charities, they tried to shape policy. They funded political campaigns, they operated in that fuzzy space between private wealth and national interest. And Epstein, he was suddenly in their orbit. The timing is hard to ignore. Epstein's rise accelerated alongside his relationship with Wexner and his entry into elite pro-Israel circles. It wasn't just luck, and it didn't stop there. You see, Epstein kept a little black book, a contact list that reads like a who's who of global influence. Over 20 numbers for Bill Clinton, 14 for Donald Trump, 11 for Alan Dershowitz, and 7 for Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel. These weren't just acquaintances. Many were frequent guests at Epstein's island and properties. Flight logs confirm it. So ask yourself, how does a man with no real business, no public company, no academic credentials, become the private banker, confidant, and fixer for the political elite? And why did so many of those around him share one thing in common? Connections to Israeli causes, Zionist networks, and the Mega Group. The more you look, the less it feels random. And Epstein, he wasn't just a financial advisor, he was something else entirely. So by now we've seen how Epstein, a man with no formal credentials and only one known client, managed to accumulate near infinite wealth and insert himself into the highest tiers of global power. But to really understand Epstein's protection, his reach, and perhaps even his purpose, you need to understand one person. Enter Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's closest partner, the woman who recruited young girls, who hosted the parties, who, as the courts later confirmed, was the key to the entire operation. But Ghislaine wasn't just some socialite, she was legacy, because her father was Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell was a towering figure, a media tycoon, member of parliament, owner of the Mirror Group newspapers in the United Kingdom. But he was something else too, something murkier. Behind closed doors, Maxwell was widely believed to be a long-term Mossad operative, Israel's elite intelligence service. And when he died in 1991, falling off his yacht naked under suspicious circumstances, Israel gave him a burial fit for a national hero. He was laid to rest on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. His funeral was attended by no less than 6 former Israeli intelligence chiefs. And then Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir eulogized him with the words, "He did more for Israel than can be told." Just think about that. After her father's death, Ghislaine moved to New York, and almost immediately, she became inseparable from Epstein. And in an odd way, he became somewhat of like a father-like figure for her. Together, they entered elite circles, political fundraisers, royal palaces, billionaire parties. But some believe they were doing more than just socializing. Enter Ari Ben Menashe, a former Israeli intelligence officer. He claims that Epstein and Ghislaine had been working with the Israeli intelligence since the 1980s. According to Ben, the operation was a classic honey trap. Use underage girls to entrap powerful men, film them, archive their footage, gain leverage. He claims this tactic was used not just for personal profit, but for political purposes, national purposes. Now, to be clear, those claims are unverified, and Ben was releasing a book about this around the time, and some even say Ben was an unreliable source. But let's just consider the evidence. Epstein had multiple passports, including one with a fake name and a Saudi residence listed. He traveled to Israel frequently. He was there in 2008 when he was under investigation in the US, and the people he surrounded himself with, many were staunchly pro-Israel. Take Ehud Barak, former Prime Minister of Israel. Between 2013 and 2017, Barak reportedly visited Epstein's various properties over 30 times. That's not casual. Victims of Epstein, the ones that he was convicted of trafficking and abusing, would say that he would force them to meet with high-profile guests. Barak's name was mentioned, but when questioned, Barak denied any wrongdoing. He claimed he never saw anything suspicious, never met Epstein in the company of women or young girls. Maybe, but what about Alan Dershowitz, the high-profile lawyer, former Harvard professor, fierce defender of Israel, a close legal advisor to both Epstein and to Benjamin Netanyahu? Dershowitz also flew in Epstein's jet, stayed at his homes, and, like Barak, denies any knowledge of abuse, despite being named by victims himself.
Were there young women in another part of the house giving massages when I wasn't around? I have no idea.
Let's pull back a little bit. Epstein didn't just move among elites. He moved among a very specific class of elites, billionaires, politicians, and intelligence-linked figures with staunch Zionist credentials. Les Wexner, a founding member of the Mega Group. Robert Maxwell, buried with Mossad honors. Alan Dershowitz, a staunch Netanyahu ally. Ehud Barak, 30-plus visits, business ties, and former Prime Minister of Israel. And when Donald Trump was asked about releasing documents after Epstein's death, he said he didn't want to ruin a bunch of lives with phony material.
Declassify the 9/11 files.
Yeah,
Would you declassify JFK files?
yeah.
Would you?
I did a lot of it.
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
All right.
I guess I would. I think that less so because, you don't know it. You don't want to affect people's lives if it's phony stuff in there, because there's a lot of phony stuff with that whole world. But I think I would, or at least
Do you think that would restore trust? Help restore trust?
Yeah, I don't know about Epstein so much as I do the others.
But we'll get to Trump in a short while. So what were they all afraid of? This isn't just about perversion or racketeering prostitution. This was about access to America's elite, to intelligence assets, to the halls of power in both Washington and quite possibly Tel Aviv. And Epstein, he was the middleman, the broker, the facilitator. The question is, for whom? Because if this was a Mossad operation, or even if it just resembled one, then the implications are enormous. It would mean foreign intelligence had access to compromising material on US presidents, prime ministers, billionaires, and beyond. It would mean Epstein wasn't just protected, he was useful. So the question isn't just how did Epstein get away with it for so long, it's who needed him to stay free, and what leverage still hasn't been revealed. So far, we've traced Jeffrey Epstein's rise from obscurity to richness, his ties to Zionist billionaires, his alleged intelligence links through Ghislaine Maxwell, and the very peculiar network of protection surrounding him. But perhaps nowhere is that protection more glaring than what happened in 2008. Dozens of underage victims had come forward, alleging they had been abused at the hands of Epstein. The FBI had gathered enough evidence to build a solid federal case. Epstein wasn't just facing jail, he was looking at the rest of his life behind bars. And then, everything seemingly vanished. The charges, the courtroom, in its place, a secret deal. And the man who made it happen? Alexander Acosta. Now remember that name. Acosta was the US attorney in Miami at that time. He was the top federal prosecutor handling Epstein's case. And instead of pursuing federal charges, he struck a non-prosecution agreement, which was basically a backdoor deal that let Epstein plead guilty to 2 minor state charges of soliciting prostitution and 1 involving a minor. No federal charges, no trial, just 13 months in a county jail. And guess what? Epstein had work release privileges. In other words, Epstein could leave the jail during the day, go to his office and return at night. Not exactly the punishment you'd expect for a serial trafficker. This is a photo of Epstein exiting a hotel, taken by a private investigator. He claimed that Epstein violated his work release conditions more than 60 times. And here's the part that truly stunned legal experts. The deal was kept secret from the victims, which isn't just unethical, it's illegal under the federal victims' rights law. Now remember Alan Dershowitz, the Trump ally, pro-Israel advocate, Epstein's lawyer, and according to a victim, a participant in the abuse, he was part of Epstein's legal dream team. This team had power, influence, and access. Still, Acosta's decision left many confused, until a bombshell dropped years later. When Donald Trump nominated Acosta to become the Secretary of Labor in 2017, questions about the Epstein deal resurfaced. And when Acosta was asked during the transition why he'd gone so easy on Epstein, his answer was simple. I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. Epstein was above my pay grade. Now you have a sitting US attorney claiming that he was told by someone to back off because Epstein was intelligence. But intelligence for who? Mossad, CIA? Both? We've already seen Epstein's ties to Israel, Les Wexner, the Mega Group, Ehud Barak, Robert Maxwell. We've seen him flee to Israel during prosecution. We've seen former Mossad insiders claim he was running compromising operations. And now, here's a US prosecutor claiming behind closed doors that Epstein was off limits. The implication was someone in Washington, maybe at the Justice Department, maybe in the intelligence community, intervened. But then, in 2019, when Epstein was rearrested on fresh federal charges, the outrage reignited. The world asked, why did Epstein get that deal in the first place? Acosta held a press conference, tried to justify it, said it was the only way to get Epstein behind bars.
Epstein got an ultimatum. Plead guilty to a charge that would require jail time and registration, or face federal charges.
But here's the thing, only a few people believed him. The backlash was swift. Acosta resigned in July 2019, just 2.5 years into his post.
And I want to thank Alex Acosta. He was a great, great secretary.
And in many ways, that one quiet line, that offhand explanation, did more to expose the truth than any court case could ever do, because it confirmed what many already suspected. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't just a criminal. He was protected. Now, we may not know who pulled the strings, but Epstein's freedom wasn't an accident. It was an arrangement. So the Epstein question isn't just legal, it's now political, even geopolitical. And no matter where we look, the trail keeps circling back to the same billionaires with deep ties to Israel. Fast forward to today. Donald Trump, a man who Epstein referred to as his closest friend.
So how do you know this? Donald's closest friend.
Who Donald Trump invited to his Mar-a-Lago hotel. Who joked on the record that Epstein likes beautiful women as much as he did, but many of them were on the younger side. And Trump doesn't want to talk about Epstein at all.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable.
He promised he'd answer the questions, and he hasn't. Instead, Trump's strategy has been misdirection, pointing fingers and not answering them. When Epstein died, Trump told reporters he didn't know what happened, but then casually threw in that Bill Clinton had flown on Epstein's plane 27 or 28 times.
I think the Clintons are involved in Jeffrey Epstein's death. I have no idea. I know he was on his plane 27 times, and he said he was on the plane 4 times. But when they checked the plane log, Bill Clinton, who is a very good friend of Epstein, he was on the plane about 27 or 28 times. So why did he say 4 times?
That detail was true, but also deeply ironic, because Trump too had ties, both social and business, to Epstein going back decades. But their relationship suddenly soured in 2004 in a real estate showdown in Palm Beach. Both Epstein and Trump were vying to buy the same mansion, and Trump won the bidding war, and insiders say that moment ended their relationship.
There's a fixture in Palm Beach. I had a falling out with him a long time ago. I don't think I've spoken to him for 15 years.
Whatever the reason, the two men reportedly parted ways after that deal. But the story doesn't stop there. In 2020, Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested for her role in Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking operation. As Epstein's close associate and former girlfriend, Maxwell was instrumental in procuring young girls for Epstein's abuse network. She was charged with multiple counts related to sex trafficking of minors and later convicted in 2021, receiving a 20-year prison sentence. Maxwell's role was pivotal in Epstein's operations, as she allegedly recruited and groomed vulnerable young women and girls, normalizing sexual abuse and facilitating encounters between these minors and Epstein and potentially his powerful associates. And how would Donald Trump respond to all of this?
I just wish her well, frankly. I've met her numerous times over the years, especially since I lived in Palm Beach, and I guess they lived in Palm Beach. But I wish her well.
Later interviews saw him calling Maxwell's case very sad. Trump once said he'd reveal everything about Epstein, open the files, name names, bring people to justice. But he hasn't. And when it really mattered, the Democrats didn't even push him on it. Kamala Harris didn't even bring it up once during the debates, even though the Epstein story could have hurt Trump, especially with young people, women, and swing voters. But no one said a word. Why? Because too many names in that little black book belong to both parties. So instead of facing it, Trump changed the subject. And just like that, the real scandal slipped out of the spotlight. Okay, but it is worth noting that in 2024, Trump did release a batch of Epstein files to a group of right-wing influencers. Yes, influencers, posing proudly for photos, and they were seen grinning. It was a bit of an odd scene, considering the subject matter. But the irony, most of the documents were heavily redacted, pages blacked out, names missing. They looked thrilled while holding proof that the truth was still being hidden. Jeffrey Epstein died on August 10th, 2019, found unresponsive in his Manhattan jail cell. His death was ruled a suicide, but the circumstances were anything but ordinary. The security footage from outside his cell went missing. The guards on duty said they fell asleep, and the cameras somehow stopped working. And just like that, the most important prisoner in America was gone. But, as we've uncovered, Epstein's death was not the end of the story. It was the final act in a long, tangled web. One that stretched from Wall Street to Tel Aviv, from private islands to the Oval Office. We've explored how Epstein wasn't just enabled by silence, he was protected by power, by billionaires, by intelligence-linked insiders, by members of the mega group, a circle of ultra-wealthy pro-Israel elites, and by political allies like Donald Trump, who once called Epstein a friend, then later claimed to know absolutely nothing. So the question is no longer, how did Epstein die? The question is, what did he know, and who made sure he'd never say it? And for Epstein, he may be gone, but the people who protected him, they're still very much alive.
Mr. Thiel, do you have any comments about Palantir's surveillance of the American people, sir? Or any of your connections to Jeffrey Epstein?
Come with me if you want to live.
About that last particular one. You're setting up a Big Brother surveillance system, and people know it, sir.
Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show, everybody. Keaton and Russ in for Jimmy while he is on the road in Europe this week. Well, we all know the George Carlin phrase by now, it's a big club and you ain't in it. Well, in this case, it's a small club and you ain't in it. But somebody who is in it is Peter Thiel. So Peter Thiel was confronted on Palantir, Jeffrey Epstein, and the Big Brother surveillance system that they are setting up outside the annual Bilderberg Group meetings. Yes, the Bilderberg Group. That's kind of old school conspiracy stuff. Yeah, but he is in attendance this year, and so he was caught up to...
The Bilderberg Group is the GOAT.
That's right. That's right. They are the OGs, right? They laid the groundwork for the World Economic Forum. They set the standard, the gold standard. So here is Peter Thiel outside being caught up to and interrogated.
Mr. Thiel, do you have any comments about Palantir's surveillance of the American people, sir? Or any of your connections to Jeffrey Epstein?
Come with me if you want to live.
About that last particular one. You're setting up a Big Brother surveillance system, and people know it, sir.
No comment. They must serve some
I think
spicy
the American
food in
people
there.
want this surveillance tech being used against them. Any comments at all on the Epstein connections?
Walk faster.
You're meeting with them.
Did she tell you she was 18,
People are waking
sir?
up to what you're doing there, sir. That's why we're here covering this.
Yeah, you got to be inside. That's the thing about the Bilderberg Group. Oh, look. More people find him. Well, that's as close as you can get.
Peter Thiel was booking it. That man picked up the pace. The second the word Epstein came out, it seemed he started getting a little faster.
Yeah, I noticed
that. Stone cold Peter Thiel. Of course, co-founded Palantir with Alex Karp, who is still here.
That's right.
And these are the guys who are setting up the Big Brother surveillance system, essentially to track, trace, and database everyone. Not just Americans, you may have heard me say that, but literally everyone. And that's a big reason part of the reason why he is here. There is a lot of heavy kind of tech representation here and military men who are preparing for something. So Peter Thiel in the house.
All right. We'll look into this a little more. Obviously, Peter Thiel, no stranger to these kinds of interrogations. Here he is last year, looking even more uncomfortable than he just looked there when interrogated about his AI being used to target Palestinians in Gaza.
So what do you think about the use of artificial intelligence or lavender by the IDF in identifying Hamas targets? And secondly, do you agree with Elon Musk about that the population decline is a risk for humanity?
Look, I'm not, without going into all the I'm not on top of all the details of what's going on in Israel because my bias is to defer to Israel. It's not for us to second guess everything, and I believe that broadly the IDF gets to decide what it wants to do, and that they're broadly in the right, and that's sort of the perspective I come back to. And if I fall into the trap of arguing you on every detailed point, I would actually be conceding the broader issue that the Middle East should be micromanaged from Cambridge, and I think that's just simply absurd. And so I'm not going to concede that point. And what was the other?
I love the way he says, and what was your other question? Like, usually when you're presented with the option to take the easy one or the hard one, you take the easy one. He, took that one, and then he's like, yeah, what was the other one? What was the other question?
Yeah, he choked. Yeah, man. If there is a spot of hope, and we need hope, this whole Iran thing woke a lot of people up, man, and we're going to need all hands on deck if you want to stop these people from executing their agenda. It's going to take mass civil uprising within the bounds of the law, of course.
Yep. Well, the Foxes are very much in the hen house now. Peter Thiel and Alex Karp being two of them. And as you'll see here, folks, there's really no way to vote against this stuff. So let's go back to Christmas of last year. That's when this piece was published. Nice Christmas publication here. The Bilderberg Group changes itself for the modern world and the return of Trump. So this was published in the lame duck period, obviously, between when Trump won and when he took office. Again, once the apex of conspiracy theories, can't imagine why that is, the influential group signals shift by naming ex-NATO chief as its new co-chair. See, you can't vote against this, folks. Can't vote against it. There's no way. Mm-hmm. The former head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, has been named the new co-chair of the influential Bilderberg Group, which convenes a yearly transatlantic policy conference and has long been the subject of conspiracy theories around the extent of its power to shape global events. I love how they call these conspiracy theories. Watch what we will read in a few slides. After a turbulent decade at the helm of the alliance's military, Stoltenberg now takes over at its preeminent discussion forum, a fiercely private 4-day event frequented by prime ministers, EU commissioners, bank bosses, corporate CEOs, and intelligence chiefs. It's a conspiracy theory to think they meet behind closed doors to discuss how the world's going to run, though. With a guest list like that, I mean, how could you be such a conspiracy theorist to think they're not? What, are they having a backgammon tournament in there? It must be.
They mostly talk about the new.
Otherwise,
yeah, they mostly talk about the new season of White Lotus.
Yeah. Exactly. Maybe they're writing the new season. Maybe the White Lotus is an op, and they gather there to write the new season.
That would not surprise me.
Yeah. Stoltenberg's tenure at NATO was dominated by the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which had begun in earnest not long before he took office in 2014. Stoltenberg oversaw what he recently described as the largest reinforcement of our collective defense in a generation, noting proudly that defense spending is on an upward trajectory across the alliance. A number of his new colleagues at Bilderberg have been benefiting from this uptick. Again, where's the conspiracy, folks? Where's the conspiracy? What are you, crazy? Several of the groups...
people in their class must really like what's going on because the markets were off the hook today. Markets are doing very well today. Very well. Like, you would almost think that they're gleeful about World War III.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are. A lot of people in that meeting certainly are. They're certainly not surprised by it, I can tell you that, as we're going to find out in a little bit. Several of the group's 31-member steering committee have senior roles in the defense industry. The billionaire former Google boss, Eric Schmidt, chaired the recent National Security Commission on AI, and is now busy launching a kamikaze drone company aimed at the lucrative Ukraine market. Meanwhile, the hugely wealthy Swedish industrialist Marcus Wallenberg is chair of defense manufacturer Saab, which enjoyed a 71% boost in orders in the first 9 months of 2024, largely due to the war with Russia. The tech luminary and Donald Trump insider Peter Thiel founded the fast-growing robotics company Anduril and the booming surveillance and AI giant Palantir. His loyal lieutenant Alex Karp, the CEO of Palantir, was voted onto the board of Bilderberg a few years ago. Karp, who claims his company is responsible for most of the targeting in Ukraine, recently told the New York Times that the U.S. will very likely soon be fighting a three-front war with China, Russia, and Iran. Remember, folks, this was published Christmas Day of 2024. Like I said, not only are people getting rich off this, they're not surprised by it. Not surprised by it. Alex Karp apparently not surprised by it. Recently told the Times the U.S. will very likely soon be fighting a three-front war with China, Russia, and Iran. So here's the list of attendees, the list of 2025 participants. As you can see, Alex Karp and Peter Thiel on the list. Stacey Abrams also on the list. She scored an invite. See, Malcolm is really good at this. He knows how to highlight two things at the same time in the same slide. I'm not so sophisticated, but I would have highlighted the bottom name there, Ann Applebaum, staff writer at The Atlantic. Just an unbelievably zealous pro-Ukraine writer. So she gets the invite. Look, Fareed Zakaria, liberal media talking head in good standing. He's there with Alex Karp and with Peter Thiel, all these enemies. Gerhard Zeller, president of Warner Brothers and Discovery International Entertainment, represented. In some respects, the geopolitical mood today is not so different from how it was in the 1950s when Bilderberg was born. Top of the agenda at the first meeting in 1954, was, what do you think, folks? The attitude towards communism in the Soviet Union, with the strictly confidential conference report referring repeatedly to the communist threat. 70 years later, at the most recent summit in Madrid, the primary threat is Russia, which sat grimly at the foot of the conference agenda underneath Ukraine and the world and the future of warfare. In 1954, the alliance was facing the emergence of communist imperialism. In 2024, it's up against what Stoltenberg calls the emerging axis of autocrats, of course, headed by Russia, China, and North Korea. So, things may look like they change, but a lot stays the same. A lot stays the same. And, much has been made of Davos and the World Economic Forum. Not wrongfully, obviously. I think those are legitimate things to talk about, obviously. But the Bilderberg Group, this goes back now 71 years. 71 years. And when you look at the guest list, it's a pretty diverse who's who of influential people, both of the Democrat variety and the Republican variety. I'm sure a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump did not think that people like Alex Karp and Peter Thiel would be palling around with Ann Applebaum, Fareed Zakaria, and Stacey Abrams at these Bilderberg conferences. But this is where a lot of this stuff is worked out. Yeah. And how in the dark we are, even though we like to think of ourselves as relatively enlightened or relatively curious or relatively inquisitive as compared to the average person who doesn't seek out alternative media like we do. I'm sure the most important people on that list we looked over because we don't even know who they are. Okay? I'm sure the people who really belong in that room are the people who we just kind of gloss over because we never heard of them. Oh, who's that? Stacey Abrams. Ooh, that's a big shiny name. Fareed Zakaria, Peter Thiel. Man, it's a small club, and we ain't in it. It's a big club in some respects. It's a small club in some respects. But the fact that you have Alex Karp there and Peter Thiel there, don't forget, folks, Alex Karp was a Democrat donor. Alex Karp was not MAGA. Elon Musk was not MAGA until the July Butler event. Right. What happened this time around, I think a lot of people saw an opportunity to glom onto this movement. They saw a leader who was very malleable and apparently very lazy, apparently too lazy to make a speech when we're on the brink of World War III. Yeah. And so they had their way with him. And
the
it's
parade
a shame.
tired him out.
It's a shame. And if you don't believe me, you don't think they had their way with him, here is some footage from Trump's hugely successful military parade. Palantir!
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'll mute the rest of that.
And these are the same people who, if that had been a Kamala event, would have had a heart attack.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Or, you know, whatever.
They're not even trying to hide it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You know, if that said Microsoft or something, you know, oh my God, yeah, no, yeah, get you to scream for anything. Get you to scream for anything. Palantir, yeah, they sponsor the event. So Palantir volunteered to foot the bill for, you know, a substantial portion of the $45 million that went to Donald Trump's birthday parade. But they are very much have their foot in the door. And what, you know, events like this remind you of is that there is not necessarily permanent power, but there is a group of people who are 10 steps out in front of the news, right? They are 10 steps out in front of everything. You know, we're watching the world on replay to a certain extent. Because these people know what's going to happen months before anything does.
Oh, sure. Well, that's why they're always on the right side of the stock market.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, it's really amazing. If you go back and you read Edward Bernays' propaganda, kind of the foundational text of modern psyops, really, it's all pretty much laid out there. Like what he's describing, the techniques for controlling and manipulating the public. Of course, he doesn't put it in those terms. He tries to make it sound like a benign and natural and necessary process of consensus building that can't possibly be used against the population. But the techniques that he lays out and the assumptions he has there, you could have written that yesterday with just different technology being referenced. You know, he basically lays out, hey, you have a few hundred leading people in different sectors of society, and what public relations, as he calls it in the book, has figured out is that it's very expensive to try to reach a mass population one person at a time. It's much more cost efficient to get to an influential person and use your capital and influence and public relations project to get that person to represent your interests. It's really worth reading because you can really see the genesis of where we are now and how they're thinking. They never stopped doing it that way. What is the Bilderberg Group? The Bilderberg Group is what he's describing. It's those people who set your agenda. He describes there how, you know, the velvet manufacturers want to sell more velvet, so they get a member of the royal family to wear some velvet, and now the velvet manufacturers sell. And to your point, if you're somebody who's tied into these people, you know that velvet is going to get sold in a couple of months, right? So you get it on the ground floor, you buy it, you make a fortune. That's how these people get rich. They stay rich. And they keep getting richer. None of this has changed. It's just become much more sophisticated. You really do have the people at the Bilderberg Group. You know, that's pretty representative of the people who are actually ruling you. And that's why nothing changes no matter who you elect. They'll let you, in order to give you the illusion of control, they'll let the parties change things at the margins. Right. This is the purpose of culture wars. This is why culture wars are front and center in a country that needs infrastructure and a social safety net. Because that kind of thing, how are you going to pay for it? Well, you got to go after the rich people, right? They don't want you talking about anything like that. They don't want you discussing things that actually affect your life, because once you start talking about those things, it's not going to be long before you say, well, we need to tax these people. They want you fighting about trans and sports, and they want you fighting about DEI. That's the purpose of it. And that's what gives you the illusion of change. This party comes in, they get rid of DEI. That party comes in, they bring in DEI. They want you to think that is meaningful change, and they don't want the horizon of your vision of what change looks like to go beyond that.
Come see us on tour in Glasgow, Manchester, Belfast, Dublin, Liverpool, Birmingham, and London. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.
What can you tell us about any of these people, basically? Dershowitz, Lawrence Tish, and Netanyahu. What's the most important things you think to know about them?
So Lawrence Tish, I guess we'll start with him. Yeah, he's one of these members of the so-called mega group that I've mentioned. He and his brothers created took over the Lowe's Corporation and basically built their empire, acquiring a lot of distressed assets across the board, a lot of them hotels, also movie theaters, things like that. They had a lot of very early dealings with Resorts International, which I mentioned earlier. They're a notorious CIA cutout created by the Dulles brothers that had infinite ties to organized crime and organized crime's offshore activity, specifically in the Caribbean. And their fronts were hotels, and the Lowe's Corporation and the Tishes operated hotels that Resorts International owned, the most notorious of which being Paradise Island, which was absolutely documented, connected to the Lansky Empire. And also Lawrence Tish had some weird dealings with his shares in Franklin National Bank and ended up sort of selling off those shares illegally to this Italian figure named Michele Sindona, who was murdered in prison with cyanide-laced coffee after he was sort of outed as this point man for corruption between the notorious Italian P2 Lodge, the CIA, and the Vatican, and also the mob. And so, the fact that Tish is dealing with those people and then teams up with the Wexners and Bronfmans and some of these other organized crime families is significant. And I hope to write about the Tishes again because I think one of the members of the Tish family is very important in New York City specifically. She runs the NYPD right now, Jessica Tish, and she has been instrumental in expanding unconstitutional mass surveillance throughout New York City and should be heavily scrutinized for that. So, yeah. Interesting. And I guess the other one, it was Alan Dershowitz. So I'm not necessarily an expert on Dershowitz beyond his Epstein ties. I know that Epstein and Dershowitz are alleged to have met around 1996. Dershowitz says that was brokered by Lynn Forrester to Rothschild. Well, I guess Lynn Forrester, then she married Evelyn de Rothschild in 2000. They were set up by Henry Kissinger. What a lovely couple. But Lynn Forrester previously had a lot of weird ties with Epstein and introduced him to a lot of powerful people. She's also a big, important funder of the Clintons historically as well, and also after her marriage. So in Dershowitz, I know he's controversial for arguing in, past newspaper articles that the age of consent should be lowered to when a girl gets her period around the time he was consorting with Jeffrey Epstein. And of course was Epstein's defense lawyer, has a lot of ties to the Israeli state. Helped orchestrate the sweetheart deal, was accused by Virginia Roberts, probably the most famous Epstein victim, of assaulting her, but has since retracted those claims after making them for years. Make of that what you will. And he's very cozy with Netanyahu. Like I mentioned a while ago, he and Brett Ratner were the special guests that Netanyahu invited to watch his UN speech. And he's been he's an ultra-Zionist, very big defender of Israel and its military adventurism and de facto apartheid policy with respect to the Palestinians.
I was actually on Piers Morgan. Have you ever been on Piers Morgan?
No. I don't think I'd be invited. It's fine.
Well, I was on with him, and I said something about he said something about how I mentioned the women and children killed. And he said something like, that's really sexist and ageist of you because a lot of women, Palestinian women and children are terrorists. And then he also said, how old are the children? And a lot of people commented like, that's not the first time he's asked that question. But I also brought up, I was like, it's really rich to hear Alan Dershowitz lecture about sexism, given his friendship with Epstein, the fact that he's defended Epstein. He's like, I've defended everyone. I've defended Bill Clinton. I'm like, oh, another credibly accused sexual offender. So that was really funny. And then I actually said to him, and they cut this out. I said, more women have credibly accused Alan Dershowitz of sexual assault than they have Hamas. And he was like, what did you say? He legitimately didn't hear me, but Piers Morgan was like, that's not fair. She took that back. She took those comments back. And then, of course, they cut it out. But then Dershowitz is like, oh, no, thank you for saying that. Now I'm going to sue you. I'll sue you.
Yeah, I mean, he's known for being a lawfare guy and threatening lots of that. I mean, the Virginia Giuffre situation. I mean, there was lawfare involved there. I don't know if that was necessarily the reason for her retraction of those claims, but it's certainly likely.
And we also know that I called him a bully on the show, and you just have to look at what he did with Norman Finkelstein. I mean, he went behind the scenes to bully people out of publishing his work, stuff like that. So we know he uses a full, it's lawfare, and it's also bullying and intimidation and threats. So.
Sure. Well, it's been very effective for him, and he had, early legal entanglements, hanging out with Donald Trump's mentor, Roy Cohn, for example, who is arguably the most notorious legal bully in the New York scene, with a lot of dubious associations. And also, I believe Dershowitz was invited to some of these B'nai B'rith events that Roy Cohn was intimately involved with. And B'nai B'rith is kind of a interesting group. They begetted the Anti-Defamation League. But are basically kind of a self-described secret society that models itself after Freemasonry. Not exactly representative of all Jews, right? But they claim to be, and often use that as sort of a shield to prevent them and their associates from criticism, sort of conflating themselves with all Jews everywhere. Which is very problematic and tends to actually increase incidents of anti-Semitism.
Right. And it's an anti-Semitic claim, too, because it's claiming that Jews are this monolith. And I guess last question for me is, I assume that you've gotten a lot of bad faith criticism from people claiming that you're an anti-Semite, right? Because you're critical.
Well, sure, of course. Yeah, but I mean, it's along the same line of reasoning. For example, my work on Leslie Wexner and the Bronfmans has been called anti-Semitic. It's absolutely crazy that you would conflate all Jews with organized crime-linked billionaires who have engaged in a lot of very suspect activity. And in the case of Wexner, argue allegedly committed murder. I mean, it's really bonkers to make that conflation. And unfortunately, I guess you could say, in a sense, that these oligarchs use the Jewish community in their historical targeting as basically human shields for scrutiny into their crimes and business relationships, and less than legitimate things that they have engaged in over the years. And there's been efforts by Alan Dershowitz, for example, to accuse Epstein victims of being anti-Semitic, for example, and all sorts of other shenanigans. But ultimately, if you're going to protect families like the Bronfmans or Leslie Wexner from scrutiny, it's only going to lead to anti-Semitism. But arguably, that's what the Likud paradigm wants, because they're openly ethno-fascist, and they need that idea of Jews as a monolith, even though it's anti-Semitic, to further their goal of having ethnofascism be the dominant view of Jews, not just in Israel, but also internationally. And the best way to do that is to make them feel victimized, or sort of use a lot of this rhetoric Netanyahu uses of the strong must destroy the weak, and we have to make our enemies fearful of us, and we have to do all of these things to make people cower, whatever. I mean, it's very disturbing rhetoric. You also hear it echoed by Zionists in the private sector, like Alex Karp of Palantir, the CEO of Palantir, that's now aiding, Israel in Gaza, has basically said the same thing, that our enemies need to be deathly afraid of us, and that's the only way to have peace. And this is stuff that's echoed by Likud all the time. But, again, I'm obviously a critic of Zionism, but people often forget that when Israel was created as a state, there were numerous forms of Zionism, like labor Zionism, for example. And now today, the dominant form of Zionism, because of Likud's dominance the past several decades, which has arguably been engineered, some of it by these American-based oligarchs who finance education and rabbis in Israel and also Israeli government officials have tried to engineer that.
But you know what's so fascinating about what you just said is that I always think about how Israel live streaming its crimes, saying it's in the name of Jews, of course creates anti-Semitism, and is of course just a disgusting. I mean, like the whole world is watching them do this. But they want anti-Semitism to justify Zionism. But what you brought up is like the personal equivalent of that. So you have these very bad actors, criminals, like corrupt people, and when they, Dershowitz, for instance, like accuses an Epstein accuser of being anti-Semitic, that also makes people look at Jews in a negative way because it's like, oh, they're hiding behind their Jewishness and look at what the Jews do. Like he's drawing attention to the fact that certain people are Jewish and these are people who are like disgusting people. So it's an interesting parallel.
Well, it's just like acting like, this type of criminal behavior in which these oligarchs have engaged is exclusive to Jews.
Right,
when
exactly.
It's not.
I mean, what happened to all the QAnon energy,
I know.
all the satanic panic that fueled the first Trump administration? I mean, all the spirit cooking, the Podesta leaks. Where's all that energy now for the actual pedophile ring that is being protected by Trump? It's just so insane. I mean, it's right in front of your faces, guys. It's Trump and his cohorts. Yep. They hoodwinked you. So, it's just the same playbook, Katie, that the real criminals are protected and then the helpless children. We should be sponsoring these children to come here. We should be giving reparations. We should be rebuilding Gaza for what we have let happen with our tax dollars. And instead, this is the outcome. This is the outcome of having a horrific bipartisan agenda that co-signs genocide, apartheid, colonialism, and ethnic cleansing. I am so disgusted to be an American, and I'm so disappointed in the rest of my citizenry for their lack of outrage. Because at this point, you cannot claim that you didn't know. You cannot claim that you didn't see. Ignorance is no excuse anymore. And so where are you? Where's your voice? Where is your body? We can't just wait until it comes on your doorstep. These are the children that need us now. All of the children who are starving, they're gonna be permanently brain damaged because they're so malnourished. This is not the world that we want to live in. So we have to fight, even if we're going to lose, Katie. We have to fight, even though we know that we're up against so much. Because we can't let Trump and these disgusting criminals win and shape the future.